You've undoubtedly heard the expression, everyone's a critic. It's usually when someone levels an unwanted complaint about something another person holds dear. Well, our guest thinks everyone should be a critic. That being one makes for a fuller, more interesting life. And he should know he's A.O. Scott, movie critic for the New York Times and author of the book Better Living Through Criticism: How to Think About Art, Pleasure, Beauty, and Truth. He says criticism isn't the same thing as just complaining or finding fault with something. It's so much more than that.
Criticism is the conversation that we have about the things that matter to us. I think it's what comes out of our experience of the works of art and the entertainment that we care about, that we consume. It's our way of thinking about, interpreting, evaluating, and arguing about those experiences that are so important and in a way so mysterious to us.
Scott says that criticism starts with I like or I don't like, and it moves on from there into why you feel that way and the justification for it.
If you walk out of the movie and you say, yeah, that was a pretty good movie, and your friend says, really? That was terrible. I hated that. And then you have to say, well, no, I liked it because blah, 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 and they come back with the reasons that they hated it. That's when criticism is happening. It's when those reactions, those feelings, those responses start turning into an argument, where you start thinking about them and articulating them and reflecting on them.
When he writes a critique of a film for the Times, is it his job to educate the reader? To make them understand the nuances of the film and what makes it a good or bad movie?
I don't think educate in a sort of a way of giving a lecture. I kind of imagine it more as, in a way, conducting a seminar, getting people to think and to argue and to continue the conversation among themselves or with me or with each other. But I'm hoping that my thinking about a given movie will encourage and maybe inspire other people to think as well.
Being a critic of any art form, be it film, fine art, food, or automobile design, comes with an element of risk. Scott says that there have been times when he's panned a film only to have the public embrace it. How do you reconcile that? Do you question your own opinions?
I tend to think, how can everybody else be so wrong? That happens a lot, that movies end up being very popular with audiences or winning prizes. And people sometimes say, well, you're so out of touch, you're so out of step, you're so wrong. But it's part of the critic's job to do that, to risk being wrong, to try to not necessarily think about what other critics are saying or what the public will say, but to put out as honest and clear and coherent a statement of our own views as we can that can stand there and sometimes to be vindicated. I mean, I think that there are sometimes movies that are, in the moment when they first come out very, very popular, that then the enthusiasm fades and people lose interest in them, or movies that people ignore that flop at the beginning and then are rediscovered as great masterpieces.
One film that Scott writes about in his book fell into that category. Director Howard Hawks' 1938 screwball comedy Bringing Up Baby, starring Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. It was panned by New York Times film critic Frank Nugent. Scott says it was one of those times when a critic didn't see the film for what it was, but was influenced by other films that came out around the same time.
I think that he was looking at Bringing Up Baby the way that I might look at an Adam Sandler movie, that there's so many movies like this. Right now, there's so many obnoxious, raunchy, R-rated comedies coming out, The Hangover, Bridesmaids, all of these movies, that it's very easy sometimes to just lump them all together and look at something and say, oh, this is another one of those. And I think that's what Nugent was doing in the 30s. Bringing Up Baby came along. He's like, oh, this is another one of these silly movies. This one, it has a leopard in it. He found Katharine Hepburn really annoying and grating. And so he wrote this 4-paragraph just pan of this movie. Like, it's just full of cliches. There's nothing new. We've seen it all before. And he moved on. And in a way missed it. He was so lost in the forest that he couldn't see that particular tree and how special it was.
Of course, Bringing Up Baby is now considered a classic comedy, but Scott says it was up to later generations to discover it. He says that as a critic, you should always try to prevent yourself from judging something compared to what's around it. That doesn't mean, however, that you shouldn't find points of comparison between what you're critiquing and other similar examples.
A lot of them fall into genres, and sometimes that's what makes them look cliched and formulaic. I mean, some of my favorite movies are boxing movies. This past year, one of my favorite movies was Creed. And you can look at that movie just at the level of its plot and say, oh my God, we've seen this 100 or 1,000 times before, going all the way back to the 1930s. You can look at this movie and say, well, there's nothing new here. And yet, at the same time, within those conventions of the genre, it's, I thought, a wonderfully fresh and original and moving and exciting film. So it's useful to have a context, always. Movies don't arrive in isolation. They're related to other movies. They're related to other works of art. They're related to the real world. So I think any context that you can invoke that kind of helps you and helps your readers make sense of a movie and what you're saying about it is a good thing.
What should we look for in art? When we go to a museum and see an impressionist or old master's painting, or attend a theater and see a play or a film, what is it that we're supposed to find? Scott says that it should be something that speaks to our emotions and surprises us.
What I hope is that some aspect of human experience that I hadn't quite seen or thought about or understood before will be revealed to me. Sometimes a movie can tell a story in a way that I've never seen or thought about before. I mean, I think of the wonderful Pixar movie that came out last year, Inside Out, which was an extraordinary way of telling a story of the psychology and of the life changes of a 12-year-old girl, which I felt like was teaching me stuff about emotions, about how the mind works, that no book of neuroscience ever could. So I'm looking, I think, always for something that illuminates in a way what it is to be human. I kind of think that that's the job of art, to help us make sense of our condition in the world, which is very often strange and confusing and frustrating and exhausting. And it's like a little flash of light that says, oh, this is who we are. This is what we're like. This is what I am.
We can't all see every film or go to every museum opening, and critics help us winnow down the selection of what's out there so we can spend our time wisely. But how do you find a good critic? One that you can trust to give you the straight scoop on a book or film.
Trust is the key word. It's not about agreeing all the time, because no one can agree with anyone all the time. And I think it's a matter, as with all writers, because critics are writers, it's kind of a matter of voice and temperament. You find someone whose work you like to read, who you feel you can kind of relate to from one week to another, whose taste makes sense to you, even if you don't necessarily share it. You kind of get it. And I do think it is a relationship that ideally can develop over time. I've been at the New York Times for a while now, for more than 16 years, and I hope that there are readers who trust me, who know where I'm coming from, who can read what I write, and whether or not they agree with it, whether or not they even end up going to see the movie, can find something that's useful, and who also can maybe be entertained for a little while.
So how should we approach art? How can we be good critics of those films, books, and other things we observe ourselves?
I think it's always great to have someone to talk about it with, whether that's a critic who you can kind of read and talk about it within your head, or a companion, a date, a friend, a group of friends. I think the thing about art that's so wonderful is that it's both a solitary activity that happens to us each one at a time, and also a collective and a social activity that we can all participate in together.
You can learn how a critic thinks and how to become a better seer and critic of art and beauty yourself in A.O. Scott's book, Better Living Through Criticism, available now in stores and online. You can find Scott's film criticism at nytimes.com and on Facebook and Twitter. You can find out more about all of our guests on our website at viewpointsonline.net. You can find archives of past programs there and on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm Gary Price.
Many of us swap meat for seafood on Fridays during Lent, but it can be a challenge to keep those dinners easy and exciting week after week. Chef Kevin Vetter of the McCormick Kitchens joins us to share simple tips to make every Lent Fish Friday delicious.
Seafood is perfect for a quick Friday night dinner because fish fillets and shrimp don't take much time to cook. Try making a quick shrimp scampi. Simply cook shrimp in a skillet with half a cup of McCormick Scampi seafood sauce and serve over pasta. It's a family-friendly dinner that's ready in about 15 minutes. Or make taco night, fish taco night. Bake tilapia fillets coated in breadcrumbs and taco seasoning until flaky and golden brown. Serve with tortillas and provide toppings like avocado, cheese, and tartar sauce.
For more recipes and tips, visit McCormick.com or find McCormick Spice on Facebook and Pinterest.
Raising awareness for women's empowerment can inspire women around the world. Actress and activist Sophia Bush is teaming with beauty accessory brand EcoTools to flood social media with positive messages of empowerment and self-confidence, all while benefiting national nonprofit Glamour's The Girl Project.
I've collaborated with EcoTools and the Girl Project to help inspire women to empower one another. Whether sending a note of encouragement or volunteering and contributing to a great organization, this is an opportunity for women to raise our collective voice and share messages of empowerment. For every message shared on social media using hashtag #MyTrueBeauty and tagging @EcoTools, EcoTools will donate $1 to the Girl Project, a global nonprofit supporting girls around the globe by breaking down the barriers to secondary education.
Join the conversation at hashtag #MyTrueBeauty and follow EcoTools and Sophia Bush on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For more information on the program and how to get involved, go to ecotools.com. That's ecotools.com.